everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge and welcome to a highly recommended video for my channel, which I basically get asked this pretty much every time I do a Q&A, or I get asked this in a lot of videos when I do my wrap-ups or things like that, and that is about how I read so many books. So if you don't know, if you found this video just because you're looking for tips, the tagline might have caught you because nope, that's not clickbait. That's the truth. I have read over 500 books so far this year. Actually, it's like over 550 books. So I will probably easily make it to 600 books this year. And that always stuns a lot of people. I understand. It stuns me too. The reason I've put off making this video for so long is for a couple reasons. The first one, most of the tips that I'm going to share with you are probably the same that you could get from any other video. Like, I'm not really doing anything special. I just maybe turn up those tips to an 11 or 12 or something like that. And all of these are going to be pretty specific to me, just because I can only really speak to my own experience. But you have asked about like my reading style or reading patterns. That, I mean, I want to give you what you want. I just want to start with that there's not really a secret sauce. It's just, this is how it works for me, right? That's all that any of us can do, is do what works for us. So, all right, one other like disclaimer that I want to put out there, like all of these tips I'm going to give you are based on my life. They're based on the job that I currently have, the amount of expendable income that I have, and the fact that I don't have a significant other, a roommate, pets, or family that I need to see continuously. Last year, when we were not in the middle of a pandemic, I read about 160 books, which was still really good. That was a little more than like one every 2 days. And I still felt very productive because the year before that, I only read about 100 books. So I am pretty proud of myself for the amount of books that I'd read last year. And things just really went off the rails in like a fun way this year. Like reading, being in the romance community, all of these things really have accelerated the joy of reading for me. And it's been such a blessing. But okay, so anyway, this video, like I was practicing this video and it was already going to be a really long time, so I don't want to take too long. But those are the two kinds of disclaimers that I want to give. Like, all of this is going to be based on how things are for me, the amount of money that I have available. There really is no book that's like out of my reach. Where some people, you might be relying on libraries, which are great. You might be relying on, only used books. You're not going to be purchasing tons of things, but that is how the situation is for me. That is the blessings that I have in my life. And so I'm pretty much able to, if I want it, I have it. And that also like keeps me from a lot of things. So first off, I'm just going to get this tip out of the way because everybody says it. And I would be a fool not to, but also it's probably the thing about me that's going to be the most consistent between every one of these videos you watch. I read in multiple formats, and I always have a book going in each format, if not more than one. So I always have an audiobook. Like I said, part of this having to do with my job. I work at a job where I can have a book going all the time. I worked at a computer even before this, and so even when I worked in the office, I could have an earbud in and be listening to stuff while I was doing paperwork or admin work, and it didn't affect my doability of my job. So that is something that everyone's going to be able to do. So there's that. Then I always have an audiobook. I always have an ebook. I have the Kindle app on my phone, as well as I have a physical Kindle that is, there are ebooks on it, but I have both versions of it. I prefer reading on my Kindle because for me it's easier on my eyes. I have the Paperwhite, which it's the newest version, so it also has a blacklight version, so I don't hurt my eyes at night, as well as during the day. I always am reading on that. And then I have, like I said, I have my phone. If I am waiting in line for something, if I am, at the gym, sometimes I'm reading on my phone while I'm doing the treadmill. I do these once a week. I do 3 miles on the treadmill, just a fast walk. I don't go crazy, and I will just be reading, either listening or reading on a page. So right there, that's always having 3 books going at once, because then I'll have a physical book as well. And so I give myself lots of options. This also allows me to bounce around if one book is getting kind of slow for me, or I'm not feeling it, or something happens and I'm just like, oh my God, I need a break from this book. I can put it down and pick up one of the other forms, and I never have any downtime. So that's something that it's kind of built up to that. Because I used to have lots of physical books going at one time, because I would bring a book everywhere. Since I was 10, I've brought a book with me everywhere. In high school, I would always have one with me, right? So that hasn't really changed at all. But I have amped it up. So with that, I kind of already said this. I am always reading. I use whatever extra time that I have, and even when it's not extra time, because that's one of the things I was getting to is I can read while I'm at work, which currently is from home. I'm literally sitting at my desk in my bedroom, have my beautiful rainbow shelf behind me, but I'm, sitting at my desk listening to an audiobook right there. And then when I get off work, I move into the other room and continue reading. I maybe, during work, sometimes I'm, watching YouTube videos instead of listening to a book, because I want to keep up on my friends' content and support them and watch them. But basically, I wake up at 7:30 a.m. I'll either listen to a podcast first in the morning, because there's a few podcasts I follow, or else I start right away with an audiobook. Then when it's lunchtime, I usually switch to my ebook or physical book and will read while I'm, have lunch while I'm doing that. And then I switch back to my audiobook. So sometimes I get through 2 or 3 audiobooks during my work hours. I was just seeing this the other day. I binged a Mafia series and I had it up to 1.8, and they were 8-hour books. So I got through I got through a whole trilogy in a day, because I could just listen to it continuously. That's a comment that I got by people is you update I feel like your Goodreads, you have a new book all the time. And I was like, I do. You're not just feeling that. That's true. That's about how quick that I'm reading. And just the other day, I got through 4 books in a day, because I listened to that trilogy. And then when it was done, I finished that trilogy at 5 in the evening. And then I had from 5 until midnight where I read another book, which I physically read a book in while I was doing other things. So, because a book, I can read a book in 2 to 3 hours, but that night I was planning YouTube videos as well as I filmed a little bit. But that's my point, is I basically have from 7:30 a.m. when I wake up until midnight or 1 when I go to sleep at night that I can read. So I have about 18 hours a day where I'm able to read. Whereas previously, I maybe had that 6 p.m. till midnight, and I was still getting through 2 books a day, before the pandemic, because I would read a little at work on my lunch break. That's a tip that you can take into your life, is that some people, they work through their lunch breaks or they whatever. I would bring a physical book with me to work, and we had cafeteria space, whatever. I would take an hour and read. Because I mentally needed a break from the day. So that's a tip you can take away from that, even if you're not reading the volume of books that I have. You can still find those minutes. That's why I hesitated to make this video, is I don't want to discourage anyone when you hear how I'm able to read and you're well, I'm never going to be able to read as much as her, so I'll just give up. That is ridiculous. Any amount that you read is, number 1, valuable, and number 2, valid. And in whatever form you're reading, ebook, audiobook, newspaper, whatever you're reading, however you are ingesting the story is a legitimate way to do that. I haven't watched hardly any TV during the pandemic. I just haven't been interested. I've watched maybe 3 TV shows because The Alienist season 2 was out, which was a 8-episode miniseries. Yellowstone season 2 is out, which had 10 episodes, or season 4 of Yellowstone, or season 3. I don't know, maybe it's season 3, whatever. Otherwise, I watch YouTube, and that's about it. I haven't really been interested in any TV or movies or anything. So just think like how much you would cut out if you weren't doing those. And I'm not telling you to do that. Whatever you choose. But I was watching a couple of other people's videos about how they read so much, right? And one thing Jess from Peace Love Books said in hers is she's like, you have to choose like which things you're going to sacrifice. And granted, like since the pandemic, it hasn't even really been a choice. Like I'm not choosing to stay away from my friends or do anything. Even, again, remember last year when I had a full social life, I still read 160 books. This year it's just been bananas because basically I can read 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is, you know, that's how I've read so much. I have some of my stats up behind me. The total number of pages I've read so far this year is 183,000. Like, that's bananas. The average number of books I've read a month is 44. And that's including like November, December not having a book amount in it because the chart that I use just is taking the average of it. Like, that is, by the end of the year, it's going to be that I've read at least 2 books a day the entire year. And that's just how it works out for me. So you have to choose like what you're going to, like if you're going to sacrifice and if you want to. Like I'm not telling you to sacrifice. Some of you have families and kids and you're just looking for tips to do more. The tips that are accessible are the ones that I said. Have multiple formats. Have a way that you can always be listening or reading to something. But like don't ignore your families or become a fiend. Like you can still be a very successful, if you're doing this for like Booktube or reviewer, you can still be very successful and not read the amount that I have. I feel like if you are reading 10 books a month, 2 books a week, you know, that is 120 books a year. Like that's what my goals always used to be, was reading 10 books a month, you know, and there were times where I like didn't hit it before. The next thing I want to mention is the kinds of books that I'm reading. This is really like romance specific for me, okay? So this year particularly, I am 95% romance. Again, like looking at the style and kinds of books that I've read, I have read, let me see, where is this one? Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. I have read 258 contemporary romance, 78 historical romance, and 115 erotic romance. The next closest to that is I've read 24 fantasy books. And so you can see, like, that's where the bulk of my reading is in romance. And I definitely would say that if you're reading romance books, which, especially Kindle romances, some of them are only 200 pages long. And to me, that doesn't devalue it as a book, not at all. But that is much different than finishing, like, look, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is like 800 pages. Crescent City, 800 pages. Those books took a lot more time. Even for me, who is like a voracious reader, like Crescent City took me 7 days, right? To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, like that's going to take a week if I'm interested in it. That's not even talking about if I'm not interested in it. So that's going to get us into the next part of this because I don't want to harp on it too much. You get the point. Those are some like tips for how to like always be reading more. Now I'm going to kind of get into how I don't have slumps, because some people brought that up. They're like, you say you never have a reading slump. You're right. I haven't had a reading slump in over 2 years. I haven't went more than a day without reading in years. Like, I can't even tell you. Like, probably about 4 years ago, because the year before I started Booktube, I was already kind of like following along a lot and like reading a lot from recommendations. So maybe the year before that, I know I only read like 30 books in maybe 2015. So it's been years since I went even a day without reading. And honestly, I'd like to say, besides sleeping, even a couple hours without reading. So please don't compare yourself if you have a full plate of things. It's about maximizing the time you do have available to you. And then my second area of this, how I don't have reading slumps, okay? So when I was trying to break this down to answer the question, a couple things really came to mind for me. And that being that I am very aware of what I like. And while I am willing to try new things, I never push myself into books anymore. Yes, I do many buddy reads, and my buddy reads have really multiplied in recent months because I made a lot of new friends on YouTube, and I'm happy to have you, and I like the engagement of reading books with them. So I have my 2 buddy reads that are my viewer's choice. I have my 2 buddy reads that I do with Tamika for the Taboo Book Club. And then this month I have 2 books I'm reading with my friend Shay and a book that I'm reading with my friend Crystal. And so that makes for like 7 books that I'm buddy reading, which is more than I would like to have, but I am willing to do it because they were all books I like wanted to read and were like already on my radar. So it doesn't feel the same. Whereas like I put To Sleep in a Sea of Stars on mine because Christopher Paolini was very influential to me when I was a young teen, and I want to try his new book. And it's not that I don't like sci-fi, but it's been a while since I've read one. And so to get myself back in the headspace for it will be difficult. When I'm used to fast-paced romances all the time, to go to a slow building sci-fi takes up more brain space, okay? Like, I fully agree that a lot of romances are like candy to me, right? They are sweet, they go down easy, they're not always valuable or teach me something. That is not all. I've read plenty of hard-hitting romances. I think romance is just as valuable as anything else. But just like there's plenty of fantasy that's not doing anything for you and doesn't have a deeper meaning, there is a lot of romance that is the case. So anyway, my point being with this, I know what kind of books are going to tick my boxes. I know what are my favorite tropes. I know which books I am going to 100% love them. And I know which books are going to be a stretch for me and I'll need to be in the right mindset for them. Okay? So that is how I categorize books in my head. So especially when I'm planning my TBR, this has been a trial and error. I look back at months where I didn't complete my TBRs, which used to be all the time. It is only in the last 3 or 4 months that I have capitalized on, this is the TBR I've made, and these are the books I'm reading, which might sound ridiculous because my TBRs usually only have 10 to 15 books on them, and I'm reading 50 to 70 books a month. It should seem easy to read those books, but it's not, because they're not always the books that I'm in the mood for or that are in a genre I want or things like that, because I have room in there where I let viewers pick books for me that I might not be in the mood for when it's time to do it. And if you've been one of my longtime viewers, you know that I definitely have not read some of our buddy reads before. But thankfully you guys still stick around because you read them with each other, and then it's okay if I don't make it through. But that's something I've really tried to change recently. I'm really trying to push myself through the books that you guys pick because I want to honor that commitment to do that. So the way that I do this is on my Kindle and in my library at home. I have areas where I have books that I know I want, whether they are books that I love the author, whether they're books that I love the subject, the trope, whatever, or they're books that you guys have recommended to me, and I have that on my Goodreads, as well as I have a collection in my Kindle, because you can make collections on your Kindle, of books that I want to read. So I just have them all saved up, and I know. So then when I finish a book, because this is a secret, this is the number one thing that I do, guys. This is the number one thing. No matter how much I loved a book, no matter how devastating it was, no matter how angry I was at it, I always, almost 100%, I want to say, because I start another book before I go to sleep or before I walk away or whatever. Even if it's the first paragraph, even if it's the first chapter. If I finish a book, and see, normally I might not always have to like literally start a new one because like I said, I have 3 to 4 books going out once. So maybe that means I finish that one and then I flip back to the one I've already started. Maybe I don't have to actually start a brand new one, but I always read a little bit of another story before I go to sleep, you know, go back to work, do any of those things. I make sure that I'm already into something else. So this is very helpful for keeping me from what I want to call book drop or book depression, or, you know, when you love a story so much and then you have a book hangover. This is what prevents me from having it. This is something that I got this as a tip from one of my favorite booktubers a long time ago, and it just helps because I think about the times where I've had a really satisfying read, which is often. I read a book that's just like, it gets me, and then I go to bed and I think about that book. You know, I maybe dream about it. And then the next morning, every book in front of me is just like garbage. They're not, but they're just garbage because it can't compare. And so one of the ways that I like keep from doing that is to start something else right away. That is just something that I've picked up, right? And so that's why having that cushion of books, which for me is a ton. I know I have like, these are all unread books. I have contemporary unread books over there. I have the fantasy unread books out in my living room. And so whatever it is, whatever I want, I start another. Another thing that I do though is I let myself go down the rabbit hole. This is a big one for me, and why I don't like my TBR to be too set. Okay, last month I read Accidental Witness by Sam Mariano. Ended up being the first book in a Mafia series, which is 8 books and had a spin-off series. So it ended up being 11 books that I binged in a week. Those were not on my plan. Accidental Witness I had because it was a Mafia book with captive elements in it, I heard. Ended up being 11 books later that I came out of that hole, okay? But that was fantastic. It felt like I was in the middle of a season of TV. I loved the characters. Sam Mariano, their relationships in that book. I was rereading parts of it the other day. Cause yeah, I do still have time to like reread some things, but I don't like count those or don't put those on Goodreads just because I have enough going on every month that I don't need to talk about my rereads always. And I just went down the rabbit hole. That's one of the ways I read so many books, because sometimes if I read it and then I'm like, I'm going to wait to read the next one, I like lose my momentum for that series, and maybe I won't come back to it, even though I would have loved it. Maybe I like then lose the vibe, or I forget things because I've read 550 books this year. Do you think I remember the name of every character and every situation in those? No, I don't. I have to take notes to remind me of why I liked a thing, you know, especially if it's a 3 or a 4 star. Maybe I don't remember like anything about it. I read The House of Isidore last week. I read Queen Takes Knights, and it was so sexy and delicious, and I just read the first 6. You know, I allow myself to go down the rabbit holes. There's so many books that I read this year that they are a part of a series. I started Krista and Becca Ritchie only back in January this year. I did not know. I just started them in January. But I started with the Like Us series. There was 6 books out in the series. Then I learned about the Halloway, and so I went back and read those 6 books. And the Addicted series, and I just was sucked right into it. So I allow myself the rabbit holes, and not having a very strong TBR helps me do that. So that's the thing too. My TBR lately is tiered. I have the buddy reads, which have priority because other people are counting on me, and I don't just want to say fuck off and like read whatever I want when, you know, you guys are counting on me or value my opinion. And then half of my TBR is just like new releases or books that I want to encourage myself to read, which was a bunch of new releases this month, like The Roommate and You Had Me at Ola and the Bromance Book Club, the newest one. Like, I wanted to get to those, so I put them on my TBR. But if I end up not wanting to read those books, then I won't, and I don't feel bad because they were on my TBR, but they weren't a buddy read, so it doesn't matter. So I leave myself a lot of freedom. Some of you, like I had people say that they feel very anxious if they read something off of their TBR. Then I say screw it. Like, I, at the beginning of this year, threw my TBR away, and I did a TBR game, but I only used it to pick 5 books, you know, and then I read whatever. I still ended up throwing that away, and because there was enough books that I was committed to for buddy reads that I didn't need a game to help me pick my TBR. I just picked, you know, and that TBR game was really focused on my owned books, which at the time were mostly fantasy. I'm not really in the mood for fantasies anymore, so I just had to let it go. I just had to let it go, and having the freedom to go down rabbit holes to pick up whatever book I want really has kept me reading, because I'm excited to find whatever I'm going to find next. I never have a dread or like, oh, you have to read this book by this time, you know, which is happening to me a little bit now because we do live shows for our books, so I kind of have to read the book before then, but still, that's only like a couple books out of 60 that I'm going to read in a month. And so I don't feel a lot of pressure for that. So yeah. And then that goes hand in hand with the, like, I don't force myself into books. I never want to, if I'm not vibing a book, I have this rule that I give a book 50 pages, or if it's a fantasy, I usually give a book 100 pages just because there's usually a lot of world building that has to happen. But romances, I give 50 pages, and fantasy books, I give 100 pages. If I'm not invested in your story by then, I'm DNFing it, and I usually don't even say anything about it. I believe that Goodreads reviews are very important for authors, especially indie authors. And so if I start one of their books and it's not because it's bad, like if it's honestly bad, I will leave a review about it being bad. Like, I'm not going to skimp out on stuff. But if I read one and I'm going to DNF it because like, I'm not in the mood for this trope or whatever, I will just delete it off of my thing, make it go away, because I don't want to write a review and hurt someone's rating when it just wasn't for me. And maybe I would love it if I tried it in 2 more months from now, but right now it's just not working. Like, I'm just really conscious of that with someone who people are looking to me for recommendations. I want to always be honest, but if a book isn't working for me, it doesn't mean it's bad. So I'll just like DNF it and move on. You'll notice, you know, like, I don't DNF a ton of books because I usually don't get to the point where I even officially DNF a book. Like, for me, I need to be at like 50% or more and stop to like officially DNF the book, because otherwise I just consider it like I sampled the book and I didn't like it, so I put it aside. So these are all things that I will really freely do. Yeah, I feel like that's most of the things. I think that if you do, the biggest things that I want to reiterate then is that, yes, have lots of versions of books to read. Have an extensive, like, not TBR, but like a pool of books that you want to read. I feel like a TBR is more of like, you take the books out of the pool and then put them on a TBR. But I like to have, like I said, Goodread collections or collections at home or Amazon lists. I have lots of Amazon lists of books that are in the tropes that I like. So I like to have a lot of mafia books in there, age gap, BDSM. I like to have a big pool of those books. And so when I finish a book, whether I loved it or hated it or DNF'd it, I can just be like, ooh, I heard this book talked about, or one of my subscribers suggested this book. Let me grab it, let me start it, and then I can go to bed. That is just something that I really have tried to do. And yeah, I know what I like at this point too. Romance is where it's at for me. If I was still reading fantasy and like pushing myself through those books just take longer for me because I need to understand what's going on. Where with a romance, I know it's 2 people going to fall in love. There's different obstacles, different tropes, different things surrounding it, but in the book, we're going to go from not together to together. That is what's going to happen in the story. And so I just really love that about romance because it's just easy to just keep it going. But there are tips from this you can take for your other books too. You know, not making yourself stay in a story if you don't want to be there. You know, a lot of my friends, that's why I don't really do like secret TBR books or I read 5, because I can't handle the like, you must read this, 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 and this, because I'm free to roam. Like, I am just free range. I can pick up a book at any time if I want to and go down the rabbit hole, and I have very few commitments that I like have to do. So yeah, that is where I'm at with everything. But there you go. This is a booktuber tells all, how I read 500 books a year. I hope that this was helpful to you. Maybe you can learn something for it. If you're interested in knowing about kind of the money side of booktube, at least from my perspective, my previous video I made about this was called about monetization on booktube and stuff, and you can check out that video and learn more maybe about like what I make on booktube. That was a really fun video, and you guys are all really responsive to it, so maybe check that out. But anyway, you can find the link to all my socials in my link tree down below. Like I said, there is a link, well, maybe I didn't say it in this one. I have a Discord where you can talk to me anytime, ask any questions you want, and we do those monthly buddy reads I talked about in there. Yeah, thanks so much for watching this, and have a wonderful day. Bye.